Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today, instead of giving a hot take review of the game we just finished playing, we're going to talk about 14 different games that we got to play this last weekend up in Portland at our BGHT Con number 2, which was a lot of fun. Adam and I were going to fly up to Portland this weekend and just come out. We rented an Airbnb with Chris and Steve. Unfortunately, Adam had to cancel at the last minute. So, Adam, we missed you, but you're here with us tonight. So, Adam's going to be our peanut gallery. He's going to give his own thoughts on the games we played and ask some questions about it since he hasn't heard anything about them yet. Chris, how'd you like BGHT Con number 2? How'd it go for you?
I thought it was absolutely amazing. Of course, the first one we did was amazing. This one was also amazing. Not having Adam there clearly made it less fun. He brings a really good energy every time he plays a game, but I think we did our best to fill the void with some good cheer and fun games, and it was an amazing time.
Does he bring it every time he plays a game?
He kind of does. Honestly, Adam's one of those people I've never gotten a bad vibe from Adam.
That's why earlier you were saying that the con was way better without me there, and I was a little hurt, but I could understand why. No, I missed you guys. The pictures looked great. I was very envious. Wish I could have been there with you guys. I had to stay home. Pretty critical weekend for the family, so it was good to be here, but very envious of your guys' gaming.
All right, so we're going to jump in and just talk about each of the games we played, give our kind of immediate impressions on them. But before we do, I do have a Twitter poll that I asked last week before we left for BGHT Con. And my question was, do you hold on to games that you don't really play anymore just because you upgraded all the components and it feels bad to get rid of something you spent so much time and money collecting? And the reason I asked this is I've got a couple games that I can't part with, even though they probably shouldn't stay in my collection. They haven't gotten played for years. They're games I still like just fine. I would be happy to go back to them, but I'm not generally asking for them, and nobody else is. These are a little bit older games. But they were some of the earliest games in my collection. At the time, I wasn't buying a lot of games, but when I just felt like thinking about my games, I'd go and search online for all the upgraded components I could find. And so I'm just having a hard time saying goodbye. Plus these games, because I've had them so long, the boxes are kind of worn and stuff. So I feel like nobody's going to want this fully upgraded game with kind of a beat up box, so it doesn't even feel like I'm going to give it to this, some good home. I'm going to end up like parting with it for $10 a piece just because somebody doesn't want the nice box with it. So I'm just kind of in a conundrum about whether I should hang on to them. Has that ever happened to you guys?
No conundrum there because you just never get rid of anything. That's just the simple answer to all these questions. Actually, I think I did answer the poll like that, but in reality, I'm second guessing that now, and I won't get into why because I think I'm going to get into that some when we start discussing our games, but there may be a scenario where I would see myself getting rid of a game that I'd gone through significant effort to upgrade, or to invest in a very high level version of it. But I won't say what it is because that's a secret for now.
Little teaser
Ooh,
there, Chris.
I'm very intrigued. I'm going to listen to this whole episode. So, Chris, you're going with the Warren Buffett strategy of hold on to everything save for one that I can think of. And I'm pretty much, so I had Scythe is the one example I can think of where I upgraded everything. I got the metal coins. I got some nice inserts. It was a beautiful set, and I think I got the big box, the big map. I had almost everything except for the fancy metal mechs like you have, Tim. But I never played it. It wasn't that I hated the game or didn't like. I never played it. It was so big and bulky and a lot of stuff, and I figured it could have a better home somewhere else. So that's the one example I can think of that I did totally bling out and ended up parting ways with it. And not because I didn't dislike the game, just because it never got played. But otherwise, I try not to upgrade something unless I'm in love with it in the first place and I want to make it beautiful, bring me a little bit more joy every time I play.
Yeah, the same way. And, I'm even kind of shifting a little bit. We're used to, if I liked a game even a decent amount, I would upgrade it. Now, I don't know, I'm just kind of drifting away. Like, I still like some good metal coins, but it's not a definite for me. Unless a game's getting played a lot, or they're just easy to get, like right when I purchase the game or something, then I may not even upgrade those. The two games I was talking about, number one was Lords of Waterdeep, which was one of my first hobby games that I picked up. I kind of was getting into games, and I found the app for this and just fell in love with it. I was playing it a lot, so I bought the game. But it's not a game. My wife has played it a couple times with me, but she's never been drawn to it. I think the theme and the crappy components on it. And I've got a lot of other worker placement games, so it's not a game that's necessary for me. I still like it. I would be happy to play it, but nobody's asking for it. But with that one, I bought upgraded metal coins, and those coins are very unique, so they were very expensive to update. And I bought little meeples to replace all the cubes that are supposed to be the adventurers you're hiring. And so that's like $100 invest in that game. It's got the expansion with it and everything. And seriously, I probably, because the box is beat up, I probably won't get more than like $20 for it. So I'm just like, well, I still like the game enough that I'll play it someday. Why just throw it away? But it's still taking up shelf space. The other one was kind of similar. It's Champions of Midgard. It's another game I bought early on. I've traveled with it several times, played it a ton, so the box is pretty worn. But I got the expansions. I upgraded everything you could for the game. I got all kinds of promos and all this stuff. I got a nice playmat. I got a playmat that has all the expansion stuff printed on it. I think I like that even less than Lords of Waterdeep. Still happy to play it once in a while, but it's just not happening. So probably should just get rid of them. Anyway, so people on Twitter answered yes. 45% answered that they would keep games because they upgraded components, even if they don't like them that much. 31% said no. And of course, I had to give the answer, I don't upgrade, because we got some Grinches that listen to us. 24% said that. They just don't upgrade games, which is probably not a bad idea. Most of the games are just as fun, just as playable if you don't upgrade everything. There's some exceptions where the upgrades really make a difference. But
I'm glad that only a quarter of us are Grinches.
I can appreciate the Grinch contingent. I like hearing from you. Keep it going strong. You have my support, Grinch contingent.
Anyway, there are a whole bunch of answers on here. As I always say, if you're not following us on Twitter, follow us at BG_hot takes on Twitter and go check out the answers this poll, because lots of interesting answers here, lots of discussion. Unfortunately, we do have a long episode to cover tonight. Hopefully we get through the whole thing. So I'm going to leave that for you to discover on your own. And we're going to jump right into the games that we played for this weekend. So I got in on Friday afternoon about 1 p.m. Chris picks me up at the airport, and we immediately went to our little Airbnb that gave us an early check-in. We walked in, hadn't had lunch, so Steve's like, there's a taco place right down the street. Let's go hit it. But before we jump into the game that we played right after we got back, I have to mention that Chris went out and bought this championship trophy for the weekend. It's this nice glass trophy with the Board Game Hot Takes logo etched in it. Really got us excited to play our best and go after this thing. So after we got back from lunch, we went after it. We decided to pick games in reverse player order from who won last year. And so the first game that Steve picked was Viscounts of the West Kingdom, because I've been talking it up a lot. Chris, this was your first play of Viscounts. How did it land for you?
This was a bit loaded for me because we played Wayfarers of the South Tigris recently, and that game really did not hit with me in a big way. And so I was a little bit skeptical, but you had talked this game up quite a bit, and you talked a lot about the selection of interesting mechanisms, many of which I like, that you thought might make this game feel different for me. Honestly, it did. I enjoyed this game far more than I did Wayfarers, and there were a number of things about it that I thought were actually quite enjoyable. I won't say that it hit with me on all cylinders. It's not one that I would choose to go back to again and again, I don't think, but it's one I'd be happy to play. I think I'd take a hard pass on Wayfarers, but I'd be happy to play Viscounts again. One of the things I wanted to point out that I thought was a lot of fun about it was the deck building aspect of it. The deck building was really neat. I enjoyed that. The one downside of the deck building part, deck building is one of my favorite things in board games. The one thing that fell a little flat with that for me was the fact that the cards didn't seem to vary that much in terms of their power. And I think that was by design. But one of the things I love to do in deck building is to get these big OP cards and then scrap the crappy stuff. There's not a lot of scrapping happening in this, and even if you have the opportunity to scrap, even your starting cards really do some interesting things and are useful. So it's a very personal thing that there's a thrill I get out of that you didn't get as much in this game. But I did like the deck building aspect of it. And I also like the castle, the big 3D castle that you put your guys into and you start moving them around. There were some really cool, what does Adam say, combo-licious opportunities there where you got to start, this guy moves into this space and that kicks this guy up into this space. And not only was there a nice toy factor to that, but it was a really enjoyable part of the game, I thought. So Tim, this was your first time playing it with a group, I believe, right?
No, I played it multiplayer a couple times before. I played it with my neighbor.
Oh, okay.
But it was my first time playing 3 players. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun, a little more dynamic, a little bit more stuff going on the board, especially that castle. which got loaded up with people, and there was a lot of pushing people around and pushing people off of it and taking up the spaces and racing for them. So that was pretty cool. I hear what you're saying about the deck building, and I don't disagree on that. I do like the way that the mechanism works, but it never feels, too varied. There is an expansion that was on Kickstarter not too long ago. I assume it'll be delivered within the coming months here. And I kind of looked at that because I've been enjoying the game a lot. And it does look like that adds some kind of changes to the way the deck, some of the cards work and some of that. So I'm excited to look into that. But I was kind of surprised on this game because, I tried to teach it as well as I could, and I gave them some hints about maybe some directions to go on. And then I was having a great game. I was just like pushing, I was scribing everything. I just had tons and tons of these books scribed. But Chris is really pushing heavy into the castle, and Steve's just doing a little bit of everything. But the whole game, Steve and Chris are like, Tim, you're just going to run away with this. We don't even have a shot here. It's not going to matter at all. And like the last turn, Chris ends up getting, 5 more people in the castle, which bumps a whole bunch of people, pushes them all around, gets him a ton of bonuses and points. And it came down, and Chris had beat me by 1 point in the end of the game. Partly because I was using this morality track a whole lot and getting a whole bunch of debts. And I didn't convert enough of the debts to actually get rid of the negative points from them. So it kind of pinged myself there. But I thought it was a really fun game. It was a fun experience. There was a lot more interaction with 3 players, both with that castle, but also up around the top of the board is where you can upgrade buildings. And when I've played 1 or 2 players, there's not too often that you're kind of comboing, because if you put 2 buildings next to each other, then they trigger a bonus. But here, it seemed like we were doing it almost every time a building was built. We were getting an extra bonus off that. So yeah, I thought it was fun. I really enjoyed it at 3 players. I think maybe that's even like a perfect player count for it. But I thought it went pretty brisk. It didn't overstay its welcome. It felt like turns went pretty quickly, and you guys picked it up well, even on a first play. So I still really liked it. I think, that's a little bit more my type of game, Chris. Steve said he loved it as well, and, it's kind of more his type of game. So a good way to start the weekend for me.
How does this sound to you, Adam?
Well, I'm interested in a couple of things. On a spectrum of like Star Realms is almost a pure deck builder where you're just buying cards, put them in your deck, scrap some other ones, shuffle, play the cards, put them out there. And you have games like Great Western Trail where the deck building is kind of a secondary or tertiary aspect. How much of the game was the deck building aspect in this case?
Deck building was probably, I'd say, a quarter of the game, maybe a little bit less. It reminds me a lot of Clank, the Clank series, or to a lesser degree, Dune, where the deck building is a mechanism that allows you to do things on the board, where the big stuff is happening out there on the board, but that's how you get the opportunity to do the things that you need to do. So it was that kind of a mechanism where the deck building was a means to an end. And which is probably why it wasn't as dramatic as it would be in a game like Star Realms. It wouldn't have worked very well to have a huge swing in card powers in this game, I don't think. So I understand why this game isn't more like that. It's understandable.
And the question I had for you, I guess specifically Chris, was I remember Tim tried to give us a little rules summary explanation, and it was like 1 a.m. and I was falling asleep and I was, I think, grumpy. How was it picking up the rules for this one? How was the teach?
It wasn't bad. I thought Tim did a really nice job with the teach, but Tim always does a really nice job with the teach. It's one of the things he's very good at. I think Steve and I, it's like any game. We stumbled a little bit at the beginning, probably made some dumb moves, accidentally made some illegal moves, but I thought it went pretty smooth.
Yeah, it was funny. Steve, he picks the game and he's like, okay, I got to see how this game works with how terrible that rules explanation was on the podcast that I listened to. So you weren't the only one falling asleep through it, apparently. But it's hard. This game has some unique mechanisms, and a lot of it they're relevant to the components on the table. So it's hard to explain some of the mechanisms without the pieces, but it was really easy to explain it when you can just like, hey, check out this icon, this represents this thing, and it shows you on your player board how you can interact with it. So it's just something that doesn't work well in podcast format.
Yeah. Sure.
But yeah, cool. Well, that was our first play of the game. Chris started off with a 1-0 lead on scoring for the weekend, and so I picked my first game, which was Tapestry. If you're a regular listener here, Chris and I are big fans of Tapestry. And I was really excited because even though I have the Arts and Architecture expansion, which is the most recent one, I have never gotten a chance to play with it yet. I have played with the Plans and Ploys expansion, which I liked a lot, but I was really excited for the Arts and Architecture expansion. And so we just added everything in. We played with both expansions. And I want to start here by just saying that I loved this version of Tapestry. It really adds decision space without complicating the game in any significant way. Like it gives you some tougher choices, but it's still always pick a track to move up and do the benefit that you get from it. But that arts and architecture track really gives you some really unique differences in the way you play out the game. So the gameplay, the experience of playing the game felt very different, even though the flow of it was exactly as it always is. I played the game 70, 80 times, and I still love every play of it, but it's starting to feel a tad repetitive. This, I felt like it completely, just not only with the extra track, but also just with the variety in the cards that we were seeing come up, the Tapestry cards, the technologies that were coming up, the new buildings. It just added so much extra stuff that it was so much fun to explore in that. So I really loved it. I would definitely recommend, if you're a Tapestry fan, check out Arts and Architecture. Chris, how did you feel about this play?
I love this game, and I was thrilled with the expansion. I'm thrilled with both of the expansions, the Plans and Ploys and the Arts and Architecture, because I think they both do something very useful. Plans and Ploys basically added a little bit more variety, a little bit of extra buildings, and some new cards. With Arts and Architecture, you're adding a whole new track and some slightly new mechanisms, but they also took some old mechanisms and kind of went off in an interesting new direction with them, like the unique city boards, where there are different shapes. It's not just grids of 3x3 squares. Now you have different opportunities. Like Steve had this one player mat called the Mesa, and the shtick with that one was there were no grid lines. You could put your things absolutely anywhere you wanted in this huge open space, but unlike the other player mats, you couldn't go off the edge because, of course, it's a Mesa. So it creates some really interesting opportunities, and there's one that we didn't play that time, but I had played before, where there's lily pads that count as a space being covered in, but you lose points for them at the end of the game if they're not covered in. So it's stuff like that that just kind of gave some new life to the game. I thought that made it fun, and I enjoy the Arts and Architecture track. It adds some new opportunities in there as well. And one thing that I actually really like, this seems like a very small thing, but one of the complaints that I've always had about this game is that you can live or die by your Tapestry cards. That if you get a crappy Tapestry card, it can be almost a game killer or a game winner if you get a great one. But it's almost impossible to get more than one Tapestry card in your first round before you go into Age 2. But this expansion gave you an opportunity right off the bat to get a pretty cheap Tapestry card. So now, pretty likely that you'd be able to get two of them. So at least you give yourself a couple of opportunities to get something more useful, to get something more dynamic in your hand. And that's something that I've complained about for a long time, and I think this fixed that.
Hold on, you said that the Mesa, you can't put buildings off the edge. Does that mean you could put buildings off the edge in the other ones?
Yeah, you can. You don't normally want to because it wastes them, right? Like you don't get any benefit for them. But if you build so well, or if you get a big building at the end, you can still run it off the end. Where you can't do that.
That makes
here.
sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The capital city man I got was the canyon, and so there's like these areas right down the middle of it that you can't build over. And then I picked up a civilization that was going to benefit me for having the most connected landmarks, and so they both looked fun to play, but they didn't work well together at all. So like the max landmarks I could have on one side of the canyon was like 4. So dumb decision by me to pick those early on. I had a great time playing with that puzzle. Chris absolutely stomped us in this game. Chris, I think you got like 322 points, right? Which is a pretty solid score in Tapestry. And Steve and I both were in like the mid 150s. So he really crushed us, but boy, did I have a great time. Playing every turn of the game was always fun choices.
Now, Adam, you're not generally a huge fan of this game, right?
I just don't know it. I think I don't know it as well as you guys. So I feel like I'm just in for a beating whenever I play with you guys. I think the first time we played, it was like, all right, Adam, this is my favorite game. No, it's my. You guys are arguing like whose favorite game it was, and I'm like, oh brother, here we go. So, but you know what? The last time we played, I had a lot of fun working myself up the track. I found some of those combolicious moves you're talking about, Chris. So I had a good time. I just copied. You guys went to space one time? Well, I'll try going to space. That sounds cool. So I just try to observe you guys, pick up some tricks, and make it happen. So break it down real quick for me. Plans and Ploys adds what?
There's a new mechanism where everybody starts with a card, kind of like an objective card. And if you hit it, then you get a landmark in your city. So that's the one kind of really unique mechanism. But the other thing that I think it does, aside from adding some really fun civilizations and new Tapestry cards, is that there is a new, basically combat cards, which were the traps in the original. The only thing that could happen is if you had a trap and someone attacked you, then you could stop them. This now mixed in some new things where there was a variety of things that could happen, like someone could play a trap on you, but you could counter it. Or if somebody attacks, you can run back and get some extra benefits. That is one of my favorite things that I think it really added with the Plans and Plays expansion.
And the arts and architecture adds a new track similar to the other 4, and does it add anything else?
Yeah, well, it's got the new player boards, as Chris mentioned, which are vastly different from the original player boards, which is definitely a nice change. A bunch of new civilizations again, and we're all fun. We played with 3 of the new civilizations this time, and I thought they were all really fun to play. The new track gives you some new mechanisms, like these arts cards that you can pick up, or masterpiece cards, I think they're called. But they basically are like new income things. So if you pick one of these up, instead of just taking the income that's on your normal mat, you'll also get one other benefit. And it's very random benefit. So it really changes how you can build your engine and the variety that you get out of it.
And then how do the expansions affect PlayLink?
It was exactly the same, because the decisions are no different. Yeah, I feel like there's really no reason you would expect the PlayLink to... Maybe, as on a first play, because we would have had to look a little bit closer at the cards or read the civilizations a little closer. But for an average person, if you played with everything or played with just the base game, I don't think you'd see any difference in the experience. Would you agree, Chris?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Okay.
Cool. So Chris won that game too. He started out 2-0-0 for the weekend. Great job, Chris. We were all pretty worried. Luckily, we didn't stay worried. So the next game I have a lot to say about, and it's kind of fun because we got a chance to play it that evening, and this is Return to Dark Tower. This game is designed by a whole bunch of people: Tim Burrell-Soward, Isaac Childress, Noah Cohen, Rob Davio, Justin Jacobson, Brian Neff from Restoration Games. Chris talked a little bit about this on the table a few episodes back, but it was definitely my first experience with it, and Steve's experience as well. But the first night we played the cooperative version of the game. I would say if we had just played that and hadn't played anything else, I would be pretty down on Return to Dark Tower. I probably don't need to give much explanation here, but basically there's a big electronic tower in the middle of the board, and if you're playing cooperative, basically what's happening is you're like trying to go around the game, complete quests, defeat monsters, or if you defeat kind of the final quest of the game before you get overrun with these little skulls that are dropping out of the tower, then you win. And we won, and it didn't feel very tense to me. It didn't feel like too many interesting decisions to me most of the time. When we were working together, like whoever was close to a building and could pick up some skulls, they did. So those were pretty easy to keep cleaned off the board. So generally, I didn't find that much fun out of that first experience. But the next morning, it was Steve's pick, and he wanted to try it again. But we tried the competitive rules with it, and I have to say that made the game a lot more fun to me. A lot more fun. I think because the tension came, one is that you only cared about the stuff that hit your region, and a lot of the quests required you to move into other regions and do stuff. So with the competitive mode, you basically start with these 4 personal quest cards, and they're 1 in each region and they're on the board. So you have to move away from your region and go collect things. But then you've got to be careful, because if too many skulls are coming down in your region, no one else is going to clean those out for you. So it added the tension of just being beat. You could just be knocked out by the game from that. But then the real tension came from just racing my opponents. And, oh God, Chris just completed his second quest, and I'm not even close to my second one. So now I'm stressing out about it. Chris, before I want to jump into what was one of the biggest moments of the weekend on this game, but what did you think? Did you like the competitive mode here?
I did. I liked it a lot. And I think I have a more positive view of the game than you do, but I absolutely get what you're saying. This is not a game that has an incredibly interesting set of mechanisms. I mean, that's not the kind of game this is. It's fun. You really have to appreciate the production in this. I mean, this game leans heavily on its production. I mean, that big tower is imposing. The app makes these great noises and visuals on the screen because you have an app that hooks up by Bluetooth to a tablet or an iPhone or what have you, that tells you various things and leads you in various directions over the course of the game. And it gives you a little soundtrack with some ambient music. And so it's really an experience. But like you said, it's not like the decisions you're making are always that engaging. Now you take that into cooperative mode, which none of us are big cooperative game players. Absolutely, it fell a little bit flat. I had a fun time playing this with my 10-year-old. Not something that I'd probably play cooperative with a bunch of hardcore gamers. But man, once you got into that competitive mode, it was a race. I mean, I was sweating it the whole time about who's accomplished what mission. How do I accomplish my mission without getting too many skulls in my kingdom? One of the things you can do is you can remove a door or replace a door from the tower, and the doors are what keep the skulls from coming out. So you can open up a door in another player's kingdom, or you can close a door in yours and maybe drop a bunch of skulls on them. That was a lot of fun, a little bit of take that. But we started getting into the end game, and I think this is where Tim's going with it. So I want to hear his description of our big exciting moment here.
First, I want to mention a couple really positive things here, aside from this big moment. The app integration was actually really, really good. The app was one of the cleanest and most complete apps. We didn't experience anything related to a bug. And it was so good because the app, it integrates to the tower with Bluetooth. But it felt like they really prepped for every negative situation. First game, you would just turn on the app and it would say turn on the tower, and then it would connect and it would just like find it, they'd sync up, and then you'd start playing. And so things that you did, basically what you would happen is, like, if you encountered a monster, if you wanted to go on a quest, you'd press a button on the app screen and that would know that you're starting that quest or whatever. And so then the tower would interact in some situations. But one of the things that actually happened to us was we're halfway through the second game and the app says the batteries are about to die in the dark tower. Replace them now so that you can keep playing. And Chris had luckily brought some extra batteries, but he turns off the dark tower, takes out the batteries, puts them back in, turns it back on, and the app immediately recognizes that it came back on. It kept us in our game. So it was just like perfectly seamless, which is to say, yes, it's a game where you can run out of batteries in the middle of it. So that's not ideal, but the app, they did a really good job with it. The artwork in it was really pretty, like really cool monsters and stuff like that. Anyway, there's this one element of the game where you would go into a dungeon. What the dungeon ultimately was like a little push your luck game. So it would just show a map on the app screen, and then you stop interacting with the board really at all. But basically what you would do is you'd click which direction you want to go in the dungeon, and you'd move to another room, and it would say, you encountered something, and so then this negative thing happens, but then you can play a skill to get past it or whatever. The way that the quest was in our competitive game was that you had to finish 3 of the 4 quests, the personal quests you had, and then you had to start the final boss interaction, which in this case was going through the dungeon and getting to the final screen of the dungeon. And Chris finishes his 3rd quest before anyone else, but he gets back to his next turn. He's a little low on resources, so he takes a move that lets him get some more resources from a castle, which gave Steve the chance to jump into the dungeon first. And so Steve starts his turn, goes into the dungeon, and he's just getting slaughtered in there. He's going down the wrong pathway. He must have tried every single room in this whole dungeon, and he's out of anything. He's got no resources. There's 2 types of resources you basically will lose if you go into a room. He's run out of all of his skills or whatever it's called that you can encounter. He's like, if I don't go to the right room here, I'm done. The dungeon's already explored, so Chris could just go there on his turn and just take it over. Steve clicks the last button. There's like 2 rooms left to explore. He clicks the last button and he gets it. He finds the final thing and he wins the whole game. So, but that's the type of game it is too, right? It is kind of just a silly push your luck game. It's fairly thematic because as you're going around this world, you're picking up new artifacts and potions you can use. But on the same point, it's pretty abstract. Like the resources you spend are soldiers, and so they're just these little red chips, which are apparently soldiers you've picked up. They don't feel like soldiers in any way. They're like little circle discs. And then you pick up something else like mana or some like little blue crystals, and then you just spend those. So they keep it really simple, and I think that maybe makes it suffer a little bit. And we'll talk about a game coming up here where it gets really fiddly to meet the theme, and in some cases that can really work. Here they kept it simple. They kept it easy to play, but it took away from a little bit of the theme. I think I enjoyed it about as much as I was hoping to, which is meaning to say I didn't have as super high expectations for it, but I did have a fun time playing it competitive with these guys. It's a light romp. If you got an hour and a half and just want to do something that's kind of brainless and fun, it's a good time. It's not an ideal game for me, but I might even ask to play it again at some point competitively, and I might have a fun time pulling it out solo sometime too. The last thing I wanted to mention is the tower, which of course is the whole focus of this thing. And it's very cool structure out in the middle of the game board, and sometimes it's fun. When the tower is going to do something, like it'll say, keep your fingers back because the rooms are going to spin, which might mean that a negative thing is going to turn to your side of the board and release skulls on you or whatever. It was exciting to watch that happen and see which door it was telling you to pull off. But generally, honestly, it didn't get me too inspired. Like the tower is a fun gimmick, and that really is what it is. You could have just done it with an app telling you where to drop some skulls on the board or something like that. So very much a gimmick. One thing I didn't like about the tower.
Hold on, Chris. Tim is pooping this tower. He's ruining my childhood dreams. Did you play this game when you were a kid? Tell me how awesome this tower is and this game is. Like, there's got to be a different side to this downer coin Tim's spinning.
I didn't play this game as a kid, but I remembered it. I couldn't afford the game as a kid, so I remember seeing it in the Sears catalog, and it was kind of like the, from, was it A Christmas Story with Red Ryder BB gun that I just never managed to get my hands on. But I remember it well. I mean, I can picture it in my mind. But I mean, I get it. Tim's not a huge upgrade guy. He loves big boxes full of wooden chits, so it doesn't surprise me that he would not be wowed by a giant plastic tower. But it is imposing. It has a table presence like nothing I've ever seen in board gaming before. And the combination of the app with the sound effects and the graphics and the interaction with the tower and seeing those little skulls popping out and killing you, I think there's a real thrill in there. So it really depends on how you feel about that kind of it. It is a gimmick. I mean, you don't have to have that. But it's like the new Marvel movie. You could have done that in the abstract without any special effects, but it just wouldn't seem as fun, right? I think this is the same thing here.
It's not even comparable. But so yeah, hey, listen, there's just one other thing about the tower I wanted to call out, which I think is an intentional callback. But it was like every time this thing would spin, it makes this really loud, like electronic toy noise. Like kind of like. And we talked about it, and we think probably they were trying to recreate the sound you would have gotten from an 80s electronic toy, right? It's intended to do that. But that I didn't find charming at all. Maybe because I didn't have a link to the toy back in the day, but it felt outdated. It felt old to me for a thing that otherwise worked really smoothly with the app and, had a couple things it did. It made it almost cheapen the mechanism, and maybe that's all you can do. To me, though, it feels like in this day and age you would have had a smoother interaction there. So to me, it kind of took it away. It made it feel like an old 80s electronic device that you would have.
So Adam's doing a lot of head shaking here, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this.
I don't know. It sounds fun to me, but I can see what you guys are saying, the gimmickiness and this and that. I want to ask about the app, though. So how do you handle that? Is it on a phone? Is it on a tablet? And second part of that, is it something that you could put on a projector on a wall in a room and have all the lights out and all this theme going, or is it like kind of you has to be small because there's hidden information on it? Or
No.
Tell me about the app.
No, the TV would be great. And in fact, Chris had a really nice setup. He's got a nice big iPad, and he had a little metal stand for it. So literally it was like raised off the table, and it was very clear for us. So you can actually, if you look at our Twitter feed, I took a picture of it at some point during the weekend. So you can go and see a picture of what the app looked like. And you could plug your iPad into a screen on a television and project it up there, and that'd be really cool. And from atmosphere wise, Chris is absolutely right. Like, they made this really cool music that whenever you're having an encounter in there's this like fantasy music that's playing in the background, and it really escalated the tension a little bit. Like it's got the excitement happening in the music. So I think the app is really cool. And for this type of game, it was a really well done app. It's clear that they put the effort in to get it right and tested it a lot and made something pretty cool with it. Chris, I got to ask you about something, because you did have a comment this weekend about the minis. What did you think about the minis in Return to Dark Tower?
Overall, I really like the minis. That's another piece of this production that's really excellent. There's also these little cardboard chits that can represent the monsters as well, which to me seems like a complete anathema to this game. I mean, this game is all about big, bold, and those chits just didn't do it. But we had the minis, and so we were using those. And the only complaint that I have about the minis is that there are a few of the big bosses that are just these little tiny guys that are not they're not distinguishable from some of like the really low-level bad guys. There's one character, it's my favorite, and I just like the table presence of it, called the Titan, who's like, I don't know, 3-4 inches tall, giant and exciting. But our big bad guy was this, I forget what his name was. He was some weird guy with like light bulbs coming out of his head.
It was like a Lich King or something like that. So he's like a humanoid size, normal sized character. And so he didn't stand out, right?
Right.
And it's kind of like
at all.
It's kind of like Blood Rage, right? When you get a monster, you want to get one of these big, huge fire giants to put out on the board. But if you get like the Dark Elf or whatever, it doesn't. It's like he looks like the size of my warrior. It's just not as fun to interact with, especially when you're supposed to be fighting this big bad villain.
Yeah, that's my one complaint. And there are some of the big villains that do have big minis, and I think that so it's not a huge dig. But one thing I wanted to add, one scenario where I could see myself playing this game regularly, pretty much any time I'm playing with a group of gamers who haven't played it before, I'd want to get this out for them. So I think it's one of those ones that there's a wow factor. Even if it's not your type of game, it's just a neat experience. So I think I could get this one out, at least a few times a year and still enjoy it.
Yeah, totally. All right, cool. Well, right after that, it was my pick again, and Chris had brought his copy of Keyflower with, and we talked about Keyflower in an episode several months back, and we've been playing it a lot on Board Game Arena, but I've never played the physical production, so I really wanted to play it in person, just get that real life experience. First thing, open up the box. Those tiles are big, huge, chunky tiles, so that was a fun part, and the art on there actually does... you can see the art, right? Yeah, it's still hard to tell the roads and stuff like that, but it was cool. Other than that, I'll just say, very quickly, it was a fun play of it. I did really well. I had a great experience with it. But, it's a dry old Euro. So for the weekend, it was not one of the more exciting parts of the weekend. What do you think of playing Keyflower 3 people in person this weekend, Chris?
I had a lot of fun with it. Like you, I don't have a lot to say because we've said it all in our review of Keyflower earlier, and it wasn't a huge moment. But like you said, the production is actually pretty nice. The production's decent. It's very satisfying, and the mechanisms, of course, are impeccable in this game, so it's always a fun time playing that. But, not that much to say about it. That's very exciting.
Before we move on to some more exciting things to talk about, though, I did want to mention that it was kind of fun for me because, sometimes when you're playing online and Board Game Arena, especially playing async or whatever, it's a little harder to kind of really see the big picture of the game and plan your whole strategy. In this game, I just felt like being able to see it in person, I really felt like I had a handle on, okay, I see that I've got this thing coming up next time. I'm going to make sure I take the first player token. And I really actually got to plan a little bit, and it didn't feel just like randomly bidding on stuff. It kind of reminded me the experience of playing in person versus online can be drastically different, and we'll talk about that more with Blood Rage, I think, on our final day. But yeah, so that's all I would say. And by the way, Keyflower was designed by Sebastian Bleasdale and Richard Breeze and published by Hooch Games. Then we jumped into a pretty fun experience in that Chris and Steve had been talking up this gaming pub in Portland. I don't know if Steve had ever been there, but Chris, you hadn't, right?
I had not. I think Steve had.
So the place is called Mox, and apparently it's a small chain. I think there's one in Seattle and there's one in Portland. But we took a Uber over. I was just blown away by this place, I have to tell you. And I've been to quite a few gaming pubs. I've been to the Game House out in Glendale and Los Angeles. I've been to a few around here, Silver Key Lounge. But this was by far the most extravagant board gaming experience I've ever had. You walk in the front door, and it's a very big game store with a huge, beautiful collection of games. Just like Chris and I were just sitting there. Steve's going back to get a table, and Chris and I just got like mouths agape, like just browsing through all the games. Oh, we got to play that. We got to try that. We got to try that. So really cool collection. Couple staff came up, really friendly people, chatted with us about the games we were looking at. Really fun just even walking in the door. And the reason we wanted to go there, I mean, aside from just experiencing, is that we really wanted to play Wonderland's War again. And so before we went over there, Steve looked it up online so we could decide whether we wanted to bring a game or we're going to buy something. But he looks it up, and they've got their stock listed on their website, and it said they still had 2 copies in stock. We ran over there, walked in the door, asked the guy, and he's like, yep, it's right over here. Steve bought a copy of Wonderland's War. And we were so excited because we've been wanting to get back to that bad. So we went, after browsing games for a little bit, we went back to the restaurant, which is just, I'm not kidding, man, one of the nicest restaurants I've ever been in. Like, just beautiful. It does not feel like a gaming pub in any way. This feels like a big kind of high-end bar place. It's some of the nicest bathrooms I've ever seen in my life. Great menu, great cocktails, great drinks. And Steve got this huge table, huge booth by the bar. And we just start setting up Wonderland's War, and the waiter comes over and he's taking our food and drink orders. Yeah, so Mox is an awesome place. If you're ever in Portland, you get a chance to check it out, you definitely check it. What did you think of Mox?
This was, like you said, this was my first experience going there. And I can say without reservation, if you live anywhere near Portland and you're a gamer and you have not been to Mox, go there right now. I mean, they literally take your phone or whatever you're listening to this on, pause it, get in your car, plug it back in, and listen to the podcast while you're driving, and get over there, because this place is absolutely amazing. The game store was one of the nicest game stores I think that I've ever been in, if not the nicest. Both the restaurant and the bar could stand alone even without the game store. They were just that good. The food was delicious. The drinks were incredible. You guys know I love a good cocktail, and they were exceptionally good there. So I am dying to get back.
Cool. All right, so let's talk about Wonderland's War, right? We just did a review on it like 2 weeks ago. We all raved about it, all had a great time. I got to tell you, this game was even better, like by a long shot, in person. We pulled the game out, and now it's huge. It's got a huge table presence. We had to kind of get it set up in the middle of the table, but then had to push everything to the side when our food came. So I mean, this was a massive table we were sitting at. So this is a big board, but I got to tell you, this board is one of the prettiest boards I've ever seen. Like, the artwork looked cool when we played it on Tabletop Simulator. It is just huge and beautiful and striking. The tea party section is awesome. The little regions in Wonderland are just gorgeous. It was amazing. So this was the retail production, and even though it didn't have the upgraded chips and it didn't have, like the minis, it was still awesome. Like, this is a game you should not skip on just because you can't get the Kickstarter version. Like, it was an awesome production to play with. Everything was still super high quality, awesome artwork. What do you think, Chris?
I don't want to water this down by throwing around too many superlatives tonight, but man, this game was absolutely amazing. We had a great time playing it when we did our review, and I figured that it would be one that was fun to play again, and I was open to trying it, and we did, and it was everything that you would hope for. Had a great time. The only complaint that I had about this game is that it had one of the most fiddly setups that you can possibly imagine. Part of it was we were punching the game sitting there in a restaurant at a table, so that probably didn't help. But by the time you're done, you got like 30 piles of these little round cardboard chits that you're going to throw in your bag, these little tokens. And there's a million little pieces, and they're all tiny pieces. They're small, flying around the table. And it didn't really affect my experience of the game, but it really affected my experience of the setup. So it takes a little bit of time to get it going.
Yeah, that's true. It is one of these games. It reminded me a lot because, an Orleans is the same thing, right? It's a bag builder, so you got to have all these separate piles of chips. And that's always been my complaint about Orleans, is that, like, I like the game, but I don't know that it's usually worth a 30-minute setup. This, again, I'm going to say, just like it last time, it was worth it. Like, I will sit down and get this set up to get it playing because it was so much fun. Every single decision, again, total blast. Had a great time with it. We had so many exciting moments in combat, exciting chip draws, fun Wonderlandians to pick up, like fun cards coming up. And I was winning tons of combats. I was doing great. I had like tons of great, castles out on the board. I had presents. I was high in points. Again, Chris and Steve are just like, Tim's going to run away with this one. There's no way that we can catch him. He's clearly got this one won. And then we get to the end game scoring and looking at all the quests and looking at the castle scoring and all that stuff. And I came in third. I forget, Chris, like Steve got pretty far ahead of us, right? And you and I were pretty close. Is that how it fell?
He got pretty far up there. But honestly, this was one of the most frustrating moments of the weekend. Was I had this method I was going with. I was going for the missions, or I forget what they call them, the quests or whatever. Yeah, quests. I doubled down on quests. I made a couple of big dumb decisions at the beginning of the game and misplayed a couple of rounds and tried to make up for it by doing a lot of quests. We got to the end. We're tallying up the score. Everybody's looking to see, is he going to go past me? Am I going to go past him? We got to the very end, and I was in front, and I was like, yes! And then after we're starting getting ready to put the game away, Steve goes, oh, wait, hold on. I've got this other card that I forgot to do something with. And he ended up beating me by 1 point. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, Steve had one more quest and he just forgot to look at the bottom up.
He had found it on the floor. It's like, oh, there's this card here, guys.
Oh yeah, I got a card I forgot too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. That's right. I ended up pretty far back, and you guys were neck and neck right at the beginning and the end of that one.
So for the setup for this one, guys, is there some kind of organizer or anything that can make the setup more expeditious, or is it just it's always going to be a matter of time of putting these things where they need to be in order to start the game?
So that's the one thing, Adam, that even though there are some other cool upgraded components, if you get like the Kickstarter version and you get the upgraded chips, but I think if you get the upgraded chips, which I think was an add-on to the Kickstarter, then it came with it was all in a tray. So you just pull the tray out and then you just pull the tokens as you need them. So that seems like a pretty nice solution. Otherwise, the box did not have any kind of insert at all. It was just like cardboard, storage. This could clearly benefit from a folded space insert, and there was plenty of room in the box for it, I think. So I think there will be some aftermarket, storage components that would make it a little bit better, because that was a big part of it, right? I mean, if you could just pull a tray of all the chips out there, that's 90% of the setup, right? That was about it. It was like separating all those things out. So I think it could go faster with the right storage component. Yeah, so another great experience there. We highly recommend it. This gets the BGHT seal of massive approval. We've never given one of those before, but we have now because it is easily, I think, all of our biggest hits. And I think we all said, well, I'll get to that later. But yeah, so that was Wonderland's War. Went back and got ready to get into a pretty big beast. Chris had brought his copy of The Great Wall by Camille Ciesla, Robert Plasowitz, Lucas Wallerix, and this is from Awaken Realms Games. So this is one of their huge Kickstarter games that got shipped out a few months back, and Chris has been dying to get it played with some people. So we sat down, got comfy, grabbed a drink, and got taught The Great Wall.
So Tim, I know this is one that you were interested in, but were skeptical of because Awaken Realms is generally not your style of gaming. But this was unusual in that it was resource management for the most part. And so I'd love to have you lead off and give your impression of the game and what you liked and what you didn't like.
Yeah, Chris, you're absolutely right. So this is a Euro game through and through, even though it's about stopping invading hordes, in China and building up the Great Wall and trying to protect the city. It's a worker placement game primarily. And the worker placement spots sets you up with putting more troops out there and getting the resources you need to do that. And it has a couple really interesting ways to do worker placement. There's also some pretty interesting engine building. There's asymmetric starting generals that you've got, and then these advisor cards that allow you to kind of have another extra power. So you kind of have this combination of two powers that are going to be different every game. And I always think that's fun when you can kind of get a completely varied bonus set of powers. The components in this thing were amazing. It didn't look anything like any Euro game I've ever seen before. Beautiful board, like just one of the coolest looking boards I've ever seen. It has this kind of watercolory artwork all over it. Beautiful card art. The general cards and the advisor cards are just these amazing, almost line drawn illustrations with a little bit of watercolor in them. Just really, really gorgeous artwork and production. In Chris's copy, he's got these like sun drop minis. So all of the cavalry and the infantry and the archers that you're putting out on the board and your what were they, the accountants or whatever, the advisors? Clerks are all these little, beautiful little minis, and each faction had different sculpts on them.
Did you go from warriors and
To clerks.
cavalry over to accountants? Is that what just happened?
When we started and I was doing the teach, Tim said, it's a Euro game when you've got clerks.
That's right. Yeah, the clerks were the worker placement characters. So they're like your typical meeples, while the warriors and stuff are what you're putting out to stop against the hordes. So production was awesome. A couple cool mechanisms. So I'm not going to go too deep here, but I'll just tell you like two things that I liked. It is very much a worker placement game, but there were two unique things with the worker placement. One was that there are many spaces that had like maybe, for example, if you wanted to generate gold resources, there were 6 spaces to place clerks on that. And each character, I think everybody started with like 4 clerks or 3 clerks, and you could pick up 3 more. So you had a lot of these clerks going around in the game. In order for anyone to activate that space on their turn, all 6 of the spaces had to be filled up. And so that was kind of interesting. There was a little bit of a like, well, if I put a character out there now and nobody else does, it's going to be sitting there. It's blocked off. I can't use it. So I maybe start loading up my own characters there. The problem is if you're the only one that put all your clerks in one of these sections and you're the only one that had clerks there, then you would get a negative thing on it. What was that? I forget what the negative thing. It was like negative
Shame.
points. Shame. That's what it was. It was shame tokens. And so that was kind of cool. And then there was a way to like upgrade these components or the kind of the worker placement abilities of some of these spaces. But beyond that, it was nothing very unique from a worker placement perspective. It was very traditional. And then most of the game kind of interacted with you collecting resources and stuff so that you could build up sections of the Great Wall, right? There's 3 sections on the board. And every turn there would be cards up there that represented the invading armies. And the invading armies had like a attack value on them, but also they had spaces where you could put your warriors and stuff. So when you went against those spaces, you'd put a warrior on one of the spaces on one of these cards. You'd get an immediate bonus that was printed there. And if all of the spaces got filled before the end of the round, then that invader got defeated. And so you're basically trying to collect these things, build up the wall, and then put warriors out to stop the invading army, which was all fine. It was all very traditional filling orders type of worker placement. And that's basically, I think, the story of the game is that it was all fine. Beautiful production and a pretty typical Euro game. Nothing too original going on with it. Chris, would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And I'd go a step further and say that there were some things that were problematic in terms of the execution as well. But first, let me focus on the positive part. Like you said, this game was absolutely amazing. The art, the sculpts, the production of this thing made it almost worth playing regardless of how you felt about the mechanisms. Almost like Dark Tower, I thought it was amazing. One mechanism that I actually really did like was the card management. Each player starts with an identical set of, I believe it was like 6 cards. And every turn you play one card that lets you do a couple of actions. But what's interesting about it, 2 things are interesting actually. One is that each card not only dictates your moves that turn, but it gives your opponents an opportunity to do some moves as well. So you actually are dictating both what you're going to do and what they can do in response to what you do. I thought that was fun because basically whenever you took a turn, you were giving me the opportunity to do something. And it made the turns a lot more fun and kept you very engaged.
Yeah, let me add one thing onto that too. One of the things that was really cool about it is that each of the cards also got an extra bonus if one of your opponents played a different specific card in that turn. So it was kind of also like, what do I think Steve is going to do this turn?
Right.
Because if he's going to do that and I pick this one, I get an extra bonus on it. So yeah, I'm glad you called that out, Chris. What's funny about it though is that most of the things that you got on the card were the ability to place workers.
Yeah.
Like there was a few other things, but basically it was fun to do that. But then you're like, okay, so now I get to place 3 workers versus 2 workers, or like some fairly minor benefit.
I will agree with that. It was more fun in theory, I think, than in practice. But the other interesting thing that they did with the card management was every time you played a card, at the end of the round, it went into a discard pile. And then the next round, you had the option of either reclaiming your cards or leaving your cards in the discard and claiming points for them. So there was an incentive on the one hand to pull back your cards and have more options available to you. On the other hand, you had an incentive to leave your cards and then get points for them. I think by the end, Steve and I had basically gotten ourselves down to our last card. So you knew exactly what we were going to play in that last hand because we'd been trying to get the points. And you had, I think, pulled your cards back a little bit earlier at some point. It's a difficult choice. I struggled with it every time, and I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, no, ultimately the game is a point salad because almost anything you do, you stop an invader, you get 2 points. You build a part of the wall, you get 5 points. And so what we found during the course of the game was that we ended up building to like 110 points each or something like that. And it was just 3-5 points per turn constantly. So it never felt that big. I think there's 2 things we missed out on though on this first play that would allow you to maybe have a little bit more impact. One is that there were 3 random kind of objective cards put up at the top of the board that would give you a decent amount of points if you could do some specific things over the course of the game. Like one of them was like 7 points per archer on the tallest part of a wall. And we completely forgot about those cards until we were like 2/3 of the way through the game. So I don't think we were really optimizing on those, but that was the least interesting of the 2. The other thing was that there were these tactics cards. They were kind of like little mini quests, and you would play them when a certain condition happened during combat. And there was one space on the board where you could go to pick up more of these cards, and we just didn't really do that much. So it wasn't until like we were kind of neck and neck the whole game, and then all of a sudden I was like, wait, I got this tactics card. I can pick up another 6 points right here. And so I set myself up for a condition, and I played it. And I think if somebody was a little bit more focused on picking some of those up and hitting some bigger bonuses, it might have been a little bit more fun to do that. But ultimately, I think it was a fairly mediocre game. If you don't have a worker placement game and you don't mind a big heavy rule set with a rule book that's hard to get through and some unknowable rules that you have to guess at because they're not written originally in English, maybe this is the game for you. But I don't think it's a game that I need to go back to, although I would be okay playing it again.
I do want to double down on what you just said, Tim. That was my biggest complaint about this game, was that there's enough of these rules where, like you said, you have to guess at them. There's a lot of complexities, and those complexities come with a lot of ambiguities. And the number of times we went combing through the rule book trying to figure out how to resolve one of these situations was quite frustrating. It wasn't horrible, but that certainly dragged me down a little bit. And I think it's one of those things that Awakened Realms kind of gets bogged down in sometimes. But Adam, how does this sound to you? Does this sound appealing to you?
Well, it sounds like the Great Wall is going to join stacks of other games in the mediocre game pile from what you guys are saying. I mean, it looks interesting. The theme and the production look absolutely fantastic, which is no surprise for Awakened Realms. But hearing you guys talk about it, is there anything, it doesn't sound like there's anything that's going to make it stand out enough to want me to play it over some of the other great games that are out there.
Yeah, I think that's probably legitimate. And this actually brings me back to a point that I started with at the beginning of the show about whether or not I would get rid of a game that I really invested in. And this is one where I would consider that. Because for one, the game has shortcomings, the one things we just talked about. Second, I will never play this game without you guys because it has a solo mode and you can play it with 2 players, but it's not a very good system. Basically, you're playing almost two-handed, or there's 2 non-player characters that both function differently. I was completely dumbfounded when I tried to play a single-player solo game of this, and I had no idea what was going on, and it just got so bogged down in the rules of trying to make your Automa opponents work that it just wasn't fun anymore. And so I won't play it solo. I probably won't ask for it when I have 2 players. You need at least 3 players to really have a good time with this. And so I look at this game and I think, do I need to keep this? And I think in the end, I probably will, because it was enough fun that I could see myself wanting to pull this out again if, say, the 3 of us were together and we had an opportunity to play a game, we had some time to kill, and we were in the mood for it. And it just looks so pretty, and I spent so much doggone money on it that I just feel like I need to have that big, beautiful box up on my shelf.
Yeah, and I told Chris, like, listen, if I was out and you wanted to play it, I'd be happy to sit down and play it again. It wasn't like I didn't enjoy it, and the whole time through we're like, oh, that's kind of a cool little thing. That's kind of a cool little thing. But yeah, middle of the road game for me. All right, so after that, Chris had brought his copy of Tzolk'in, the Mayan Calendar. This is another game like Keyflower that I've only played on Board Game Arena, and I really wanted to try it in person. I even bought my own copy, but I haven't played it yet. But he also had the Tribes and Prophecies expansion with him. Oh, by the way, Steve won Great Wall, if you're keeping score. But Chris had the Tribes and Prophecies expansion, which I'd heard good things about, and I've played enough Tzolk'in at this point. I was like, yeah, let's see what the expansion mixes up. I got to say, I love the expansion. Chris, why don't you start off here? What do you think about the expansion, and how do you like this play of Tzolk'in?
I loved it. I thought it was great. Tzolk'in is one of those games like Tapestry that I've played enough times that it's like an old friend. But like an old friend, you're just like, oh, it's so familiar. And sometimes in this game, the familiarity makes it feel like, yeah, I'm doing the same old things I always do. Well, the expansion turns that completely on its head by giving some very intensely interesting and powerful starting abilities. I'm trying to remember what they were.
Mine let me, like, whenever I would take a worker off one of the wheels, I could pretend like I was taking off the adjacent wheel and get the benefit there. So, for example, if someone blocked me out of a space that I wanted to take on my wheel or picked up something, I could switch. And I didn't use the ability a whole lot of times during the game, but it did give me a bit of flexibility when it was really important. So it was a pretty neat thing to play around with and just think about as part of the puzzle. I don't remember what yours and Steve's were, Chris, though.
Mine did not give me an ongoing ability, but now that I'm thinking about it, I do remember it. It didn't give me an ongoing ability, but it did give me the opportunity to keep 3 of my starting resource tiles instead of 2, because you start with 4 resource tiles and you have to pick 2 of them, and that's the resources you start with. I got to keep 3, which can be huge. It basically gave me the opportunity right on the first turn or 2 to buy a building and to build up some stuff and start with a 3rd worker if I wanted to. A 4th worker. Definitely changed the game, and then I certainly saw how your powers changed the game for you. So I think it was very impactful.
Yeah, it was fun. A little difference. I don't think drastically impactful, not something you have to track a whole lot more during the game, but just gave you a little bit of a change in how you could play. But what I actually thought was more interesting, or what I think makes the game even better from this expansion, is the Prophecies component. Basically what happens is that there are 3 tiles randomly chosen that are set up next to the board. And one is going to trigger in the second era. It's basically the game's played over 4 eras. So after you do your first kind of incoming or feeding phase, then you would the first of those tiles would activate, and the tile had a negative thing that was going to happen during that era. Like it might say, when building a building is going to cost 1 more resource, or doing an upgrade is going to cost 1 more resource. But there would also be, for actually having more of that type of thing, there would be scoring benefits that you get at the end of the era, or negative ones if you didn't do enough. So that first one that we hit in that second era said you want to have, I think it was 3 buildings built, because if you had between 3 and 4 buildings built, you would get 0 points. But if you had less than 3 built, you would get negative points for it. But if you could build up to like 4 or 5 points, you could get even more than that. But then it made it harder to build buildings with that tile out there. So if you got to that era and hadn't already kind of succeeded at it, you were spending extra resources to try to get there. But what it did is it completely changed our motivation over the game. Instead of just saying like, hey, I'm just going to go on the Chichen Itchen track and put as many skulls out as I can. Instead, it's like, boy, I better start figuring out how to build some buildings here. And then by the next year, I better start figuring out how to upgrade some things. And all of them seem to kind of push you away from what used to be, in our opinion, the most powerful scoring mechanism, which is that skull track. So it was really cool, really fun puzzle to play around. Again, didn't, just like Tapestry, I don't think it added to the time, and I don't think it overcomplicated the game, but it definitely changed, I think, the way you're going to play the game every time. And I think that's a great thing to get from an expansion experience.
Sounds great. How was the in-person experience versus board game arena? It seems like this would be so fun to have that tactile experience and being able to see other people's resources and just immediate access to the board game state.
Totally, again, kind of like Keyflower, where it was just like all of a sudden I could actually assess the buildings that were out there and actually think about them throughout the course of the game, and I could see what Chris was trying to do and what kind of resources he had built up, and it was way better playing it in person. And of course the tactile experience is great, except Chris wouldn't let me touch the wheel. He had to be the one turning the wheel every time. So, I didn't really get to experience that too much. But no, it was super fun. I loved it. All right, cool. So Chris pulled that one off just barely. I thought I had that one in the bag, and it's another game that he stole right out from under me this weekend. But that was our last game of, I think it was Saturday night. So Sunday morning, it was Steve's pick, and he had brought Clank in Space with him, which is a game that we have also reviewed on the episode, and that was a blast. I had so much fun playing Clank. I got to get it back. I want to pick up another copy of Clank and play it some more because it was a blast. Chris, do you have fun playing Clank in Space?
I always have fun playing Clank in Space. It was one of the first games that I ever played with you. One of them, not the first. And it was actually the first hobby game that I ever played with my wife, because you and your wife had us over for dinner and a game, and we played that and just had a lovely time. So a lot of nice memories associated with that. And besides that, the game is just fun. It has a great sense of humor. The mechanisms are excellent. It does a really nice job of some interesting deck building opportunities. I just really love this game.
Yeah, and it was one of these things. It was getting tight, right? It was like, it's got a kind of a push your luck element, and it gets more and more dangerous as you get into the game. And at first I was doing really well, and I couldn't seem to get out anywhere, and Steve teleports back, gets into the cargo bay. I'm kind of behind him, and Chris manages to just walk his way out. Like, he didn't pick up a key or a teleport or anything. He just kind of meanders his way out and makes it back to the cargo bay basically the same time we did, which didn't make any sense at all. And as Chris is walking his way through the cargo bay, Steve just gets stuck. He can't draw a boot to save his life, and you need 2 boots to get the last space out of the cargo bay. So I managed to just like walk right by him, get into this little escape pod and get off. And then Chris manages to just walk right off. He didn't even have a problem. But we were all getting pretty close at the end. And Chris, I don't remember, did Steve actually I think he finally made it out. Like, he was almost dead. He finally made it out.
No, because remember, we were making jokes the rest of the weekend about our poor dead friend, Steve.
Steve, you're right. Yeah, so Steve died in the cargo bay on the ship. But fun game. Everyone had a chance. It was competitive. We'd all picked up big artifacts and built some really fun combos going on in our decks. Man, always a great game. Clank is. Yeah.
How do you feel about Clank, Adam? I can't remember what your take on that one was.
I was going to say, Steve, I don't know how many times I have to tell you, you got to get your boots, man. Duh. That's like step 1 of this game. Get your boots. Come on.
We were joking because the last time I think I played that game was with you, Adam, on your first play of it. And I was telling Chris, we're like almost back to the cargo bay. And I was like, at this point in the game, Adam would still be like right around here. Like, barely moved out of the original starting
I would have barely
spot.
left the cargo holds and start finding stuff. So I'd been like, where, like kind of like the lost old guy, where am I right now? What, am I supposed to get out of here?
Hey, Chris, now that you're into solo gaming, by the way, Renegade put out a really, really great app made for the solo game. And it's a 5-scenario game where it tells a story. And each setup is slightly different, and you can kind of pick up some special cards in the game and stuff like that. It's really fun to go through that little 5-game thing, and then it scores you how well you did then, because you add up your points and see how much damage you got and stuff, and then it gives you a score. And the goal is to get like an A, because it's like an A through F grade you get on it. And so the goal is I kept playing it until I got an A on every scenario, and finally got an A for the whole game. So really fun if you ever feel like busting that out and don't have someone to play with.
Well, that does sound like a lot of fun.
The next thing we played was finally Nemesis. Chris picked up Nemesis specifically so we could get it played this weekend. He's been talking about it a while, and I said, Chris, there's no way I'm going to go learn this through a video or rule book. If you'll teach it, then I'll play it with you. And I have to say, I was not looking forward to this very much. I did not expect this to be a very fun experience. So just so you know, I had my expectations set low. But Chris taught the game pretty quickly. There's a lot of components, a lot of setup, lots of little decks you got to shuffle and stuff like that. He taught it pretty quickly. It's actually not that complicated of a rule set, to be honest. And I didn't even find playing it to feel that fiddly. Most of the things were pretty clear. It's got a kind of a cool hand management system where every card has a number on it, which is the cost, but the cost is discarding cards. So many of the cards have a 0 cost, so you just discard that card and you get whatever benefit you want. But some of them might have a 1 or a 2, so if you're going to play a 2, you have to discard that card plus 2 other cards in order to get the benefit on the card. And then there are some basic actions you can take for 1 cost, and then there are some rooms you'll go through the ship and open, like uncover rooms, and each room has an action on it. And if the room isn't malfunctioning, then you can even use the action that's in the room. So a lot of fun choices every turn, but it went really quick. Everybody gets to take 2 actions, and then they keep, and then the next person plays, and you keep going around. It's kind of like an Eclipse style where you keep going until everybody passes. And then when everybody passes, then you basically draw your next 5 cards. I think, and you do some like event things will happen, like, monsters might spawn or something might blow up or whatever. And then you go back and start your next 5-round phase. So Chris, your first multiplayer game of Nemesis. I'm sorry it was such a bummer for you. No, I'm just kidding.
To start, I gotta say, this is like you being Tim had to start with, so Nemesis. So here's how you manage your resources in this game. Let me take a step back and actually address the true shining moment here, which is the atmospherics of Nemesis. In Nemesis, for anybody who's not familiar, you play as the members of a crew of a ship that's come out of hyperspace. You have a dead crew member sitting there in the hypersleep chamber, and nobody knows why. You don't know how to get around the ship, which is why the exploration is a little bit wonky, because you don't know what's in the rooms, so you have to go from room to room figuring things out. And as we learn, the reason why the ship came out of hyperspace was because you've been invaded by aliens, which are big, ugly aliens that look very much like the aliens in the movie Aliens. But these are not aliens, they're intruders. But it's not just a question of defeating the aliens and getting out safely. You also have a lot of suspicion of your teammates, because you have however many players, and each player has their own goals. They get some agency in this because each player gets to start with a corporate goal and a personal goal, and then when they have their first alien encounter, they get to decide which one they want to do, which goal do they think they have the best chance of actually carrying out. And you may find that your opponents or your friends or your frenemies actually have a very different goal than what you have. So my goal may be, we need to get this ship home with everybody safe. And your goal may be, no, we need to get an egg back so that corporate can look into it. Or I think there's 1 or 2 cards that even say you have to make sure that player 2 doesn't survive. So at the outset of this game, I think you said it, but you're like, I started distrusting you guys the minute this game started.
Yeah, no, Chris is absolutely right. I've never before in my life been explained a game that has, some kind of fun adventure, some rule stuff, and then I look at my 2 goals, my two possible goals, and it starts to awaken in me what they could possibly be trying to do, and it scares the hell out of me. And I'm literally like, I can't trust a single thing they're doing. So the whole game for me was trust but verify, trust but verify. Like Chris is like, hey Tim, I'm gonna go check the engine down here, and I was like, Steve, can you go check that engine after Chris? You're right behind him. And Chris like, guys, I'm on the same side as you. I'm trying to get the ship to Earth. And I was like, yeah, but trust but verify. And Steve went down, and Chris had not sabotaged the engine, so we trusted him. Turned out he could have sabotaged the engine, and that would have met one of his goals too, but he was tricking us. He knew we were going to check him. And then with me, like, I was the first one to the cockpit. I think I was the only one that made it up there. In the cockpit, you can check your destination of where the ship's going, and you can change the destination. And so I went up there, and we're kind of talking about, just hinting at what our goals might be. And everyone's like, listen, are you guys okay? Are we going to try to make it back to Earth? And everyone kind of agreed, yeah, we'll make it back to Earth. So I'm up in the cockpit, and I changed it to Mars. So I'm trying to get us to Mars. They said they didn't really care whether we go to Earth, but they'd be fine with it. But just in case one of them actually did care about going to Earth, I set it to Mars and told them that we were going to Earth, and they never knew that until the end of the game. So it was just like these little decisions you could make that could completely mess up someone's strategy, but the game gets so tense so fast about how you can move through the deck without just getting slaughtered by huge monsters. And the first time we get one of these encounters, and by the way, the encounters are like, it's a bag building thing. So you draw out of a bag of chits, and there's one blank chip in the bag, but the rest of them are going to be some kind of monster. But as the game goes on, monsters get worse in that bag. The bag gets worse and worse, and so you're going to get bigger and bigger monsters. But the first time we had an encounter, we pull one out, and I think it was just like a little tiny larva. It's this tiny little spider thing, and it was just kind of cute and hilarious. And so we're just like, Chris, just punch it. And he's like, no, I'm running away. We're like, no, you got to use your one ammo and shoot it. So he kills off this little larva. And then we do the next bag pull where we interact with an alien. And it's just an adult alien, and this thing was double the size of our characters. Now, you want to talk about scale in minis? Like, this was awesome because you got pretty good size minis. I was this soldier with huge armor on, and this massive alien monster was twice the size of me, and it was just intense. So cool how they just made every moment of this game feel thematic and exciting and stressful and tense, and there was like always a dozen things you wanted to try to get done. You needed to go and refill your ammo or pick up some supplies, but only if you could get out of the room without dying, or like not die when you walked into the next room. And it's just a blast. It's such a fun game. I gotta say, I was blown away. One of my favorite gaming experiences of all time. Definitely my favorite experience for the weekend. I still wouldn't say it was my favorite game. We'll get to that at the end of the night, but it was my favorite gaming experience of the weekend. And I would love to go back and play this game anytime. Chris, how do you feel about it?
Well, I agree with everything you just said, but I wanted to go back before getting to my final thoughts on this and point out one mechanism that I thought was really neat. There are several pieces of information that are very important on the ship that affect everything. One of them that Tim mentioned was the coordinates. And there's a card that's flipped face down that has the coordinates for the ship. It tells you where you're headed to, and you can change that, or you can leave it the same. So there's one action that lets you look at it. There's another action that lets you change it if you want to. And then similarly, the ship has 3 engines, and 2 of them have to be functioning in order to survive. So when the ship goes into hyperspace, or when you get into the sleeping pods, if 2 of your engines are down, you're going to blow up. And so that's pretty important. Similar to the coordinates, there are some face-down tiles that show the status of your engine. For both of these, the coordinates and the engine, you get to look at what's there, but you're not allowed to show it to your opponents. So you can tell them, but you're encouraged in the instructions even to lie about it. You don't have to tell the truth, and you can't show them to prove that what you're saying is true. And so I just love that about this. It just kept the intensity level super high, and it's funny because paranoia seems like it would not be a fun way to go through a gaming experience. It felt like we were in a movie. And that I was kind of keeping an eye on you guys. I was, on the one hand, I was rooting for you because I knew that you were going to help me kill aliens, and I need to stay alive here. So that's a good thing, and you might get some stuff done that's going to be useful for me. But at the same time, like, well, you know what? I really kind of want to blow the ship up, so that's so I don't want to be too friendly here, and I just thought that was great. But in the end, I thought this was probably the most successful version of a highly thematic, cinematic level game that I have ever played. It was everything that I was hoping it was going to be, and I had some fear because, like I mentioned before with Great Wall, Awakened Realms has a tendency to get a little bit bogged down in incredibly heavy rule sets. This game did not have that problem. It definitely had a relatively heavy rule set, but once you got into it and got moving through it, it became pretty rote. You kind of got used to the flow of a turn and how it worked, and the card system was actually, I think, quite elegant. Like, for example, an intruder card, an intruder attack card, you play it for attack. Or if you're attacking them, there's another part of the card that deals with that. So you're drawing these cards, but they kind of kept it svelte so that you're using the same cards to do various things, and so you get very familiar with the anatomy of the card. And I thought that was kind of nice. So I was absolutely thrilled. I would love to play this game again. There's so much luck involved in it that it's not a real test of your gaming skills, but it's almost like an escape room. You feel like you're putting yourself into this scenario with a story behind it, and you're acting it out. And I had an absolute blast. I would love to play this one. I really want to get Adam in on a game of this because I think you'd like it as well. I mean, does this sound like it's your cup of tea, Adam?
Absolutely. I remember, Tim, you and I had said at one point that we had no interest in playing Nemesis. But then hearing you say how much fun you had, what a shock, what a surprise. And then I think we had built up and we reluctantly admitted, okay, fine,
Okay,
we'd
sounds
probably
pretty
give it a
cool.
try. Yeah. And then now it sounds like I need to play this game right now. So I'm envious of this experience. It sounds amazing hearing you guys talk about it. So how was it? I mean, did you have to lie to your buddy? How did that feel?
Yeah, we were, and it was like there were situations where I was really stressed out. Like I had an objective that would have said I could be the only one alive at the end. But ultimately, I kind of weighed the options of being able to stop them from succeeding and let them die, which I probably could have done. And the other one was getting us to Mars. And by the time the first alien came up, I was the only one close to that cockpit, kind of feeling out my other players, and they seemed to be okay with the ship getting away somewhere. Nobody was trying to blow it up yet. So I was like, I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm gonna try to get the ship to Mars. And then I had a secondary goal on that one, which we could go back to Earth as long as we killed the the nest, which is a big complicated thing on its own. You have to go into this nest room and kill all these eggs without the queen coming in and killing you. And so I was like, okay, well, even if they discover we're going to Mars and someone changes it somewhere else, you know what? That's okay. If we're going to Earth, I can go take care of this other thing, because I was the big soldier. I had like the huge gun in the thing. So I had no idea for sure. There was a point in time where an event happened where the countdown clock, self-destruct, basically triggered and started counting down. And so we had like 5 rounds to turn off the self-destruct. And I didn't know for sure whether Steve and Adam were going to, or Steve and Chris were going to be on board with that. And luckily Steve was right by the room where he could fix it, and he starts working towards fixing. I'm like, shh. But the whole time he's doing that, and Chris is trying to get out of the engine room because he just gets swarmed with monsters and can't hit like the side of a barn. Then while they're doing that, I start figuring out how I can sabotage them from getting out, because even though my goal wasn't sabotaging them, I knew that if I was the only one that won my objective, then I'd get an extra point for the weekend and they wouldn't. So I was literally like I almost died. I got very, very lucky at the end to even get off the ship. I wasted a couple turns just kind of setting up some things. Like I went to a room where I could close a door, but right before I could manage to close off the door and lock Steve down away from the escape pods, huge mother alien came in and started like slaughtering me. So it was like completely didn't go my way, but I had such a blast, like plotting and just trying to do my own thing and make sure that we all, like we survived at the right time. We could get off when not. Wow, what a cool experience. I would love to jump back into this. And I think, without the rules teach and just kind of knowing everything, we probably would have played that in 2 hours. I think we played 3 hours with the rules teach or something. So it's really not that bad. And all 2 hours was fun. Now, Chris, you actually got eliminated at one point.
Yeah.
Probably 5 or 6 turns before the end of the game. How did that feel? Were you, obviously it wasn't ideal, but was that like a really frustrating moment, or what? Obviously it didn't seem to upset your experience too much.
No, honestly, I was so high on that game that I was happy to sit there and watch you guys try to get to the end. And the other thing too, right. But I was kind of interested to see how you guys were going to end up. Were you guys going to get blown up? I was kind of rooting for you to get killed. Sorry, but yeah. And one thing I was thinking about as we were pondering this was I'd love to see how some of these other scenarios might play out where, for example, like what if we had open hostilities? Like what if I had lied about the engines and you guys had found out about it and now and I can get myself into, say, the door control room and I can, close doors so that you can't get through, or the airlock control and, kill one of you guys. There's so many ways that you could go with this. It's a story every time, I would imagine. I played a solo game of it to prep for this. By the end of it, the ship was on fire everywhere. My whole game was about putting out fires. We never had any fire that came up in our version of the game, in the play that we did. And so it was a very different story, but, it's a story.
No, but let me tell you how the game ended. And there was like half a dozen other moments I would love to talk through, but I won't keep you all day. But you got to hear how this ended, Adam. So there are certain points of the game where you can get infected or potentially infected, but you don't know this for sure. Basically what happens is if certain events happen and you take an injury, you may take a minor injury, which are bad, but if you get 3 of them, then you get a major injury. And a major injury is a card you pull off the top of a deck, and it like impacts you. Like you might lose your arm, and so you can't carry 2 heavy objects anymore, or you might get injured on your foot, so your movement's harder, or stuff like that. But if you get 4 heavy injuries, then you die. So that's another way to die. But the other thing that can happen, aside from getting wounded, critically or minor wounds, you can get infections. And these infection cards are cards that you shuffle into your deck, and they clutter up the deck. But they also have one of these old-fashioned, like, where you have to put it into a red screen to read it. And so, you know what I'm talking about? So, like, if you've got it in your deck, you don't know whether you're infected. You're potentially infected then, but you might not be infected. but it's cluttering up your deck, so that's not a good thing. But there are certain points where you can go and check for an infection, like you can go to a medical bay or whatever and check for an infection. And if you find out that you actually are infected, then you have to put a little larva on your player board to represent that you've got a larva on you. And then at the end of the game, basically, well, if you get 2 larvae, you're dead. But also at the end of the game, when we had to get off the escape pod, we had to check for infection. And the way you check for infection is you look at all those infection cards in your deck. And if any of them show that you're infected, then you shuffle them all into your deck and you draw 4 off the top of your deck. And if any one of those infection cards shows up, then you lose. So even right up to the last moment of the game, it was like this super tense. So we're looking through. I've got 4 of these infection cards in my deck and Steve's got 3. All 4 of mine were empty. And one of his had an infection. So I got out. I managed to get on the escape pod and leave. And from what we saw from that infection deck, it was pretty heavily loaded with actual infections on there. So I got pretty lucky. So Steve then has to shuffle these 3 infection cards in with his other 10 cards in his deck and then draw 4 off the top. And he didn't hit an infection, managed to get in the escape pod and get off. And that was right after several tense moments of us just barely escaping from aliens just to even get to the escape pods. So after Chris died, I mean, he just watched like 6 rounds of just complete like insanity of us trying to escape the ship and get off. And when we got off, we only knew that one of the engines was good, the one that Steve checked on Chris. We didn't even know. So we were taking a 50% chance that both the other engines would be bad and the ship would have blown up anyway. But we were both in bad enough shape where we couldn't go and check the engines. So there's just so many moments of just like excitement, tension. And like Chris said, though, it's luck too, right? Like I could see a game where you have your first couple encounters and you just get destroyed and you don't really have a good game here. Luckily, that didn't really happen for us. You know, Chris got beat up pretty bad, but he got to do some fun stuff in any case. So there could be a bad game here, but we sure didn't experience it here. It was a blast.
From a design perspective and gameplay perspective, it seems so interesting because you're not converting a cube into 2 pieces of corn, into this, into this. It's about the scenarios and the choices and how those can all interact with each other. What a neat concept from design to gameplay. That's something that I would love to play. I do see opportunity for those potentially sour combinations to crop up, but on the whole, it seems like an amazing thing, and now I want to play it right away.
Yeah, and even all the mechanisms that we didn't even talk on, things like how you can search a room, and that's a deck of cards, and so then you're going to find different objects in every room that you search, and the cards are going to help you in different ways, and how you can run out of ammo, but there's a place on the ship you can go and reload ammo if you don't find more of it. And the way that the aliens attack you is that when you walk into a room, you do a dice roll to see if you made noise down a hallway, and you almost always make some noise somewhere. But then if you make noise again in the same hallway, that's when an alien appears. So every time you move around the ship, every move in the ship is a tense moment because you have a chance of potentially having an alien attack you when you're trying to do these other things. So yeah, everything really, really, really worked here, and I'm shocked by it. And I think our listeners are going to be shocked too. Someone even said on Twitter when they said we were playing it, they're like, Tim's going to hate this.
Right.
And boy, I would have agreed.
But I think that was probably me. I probably said that.
But yeah, no, it was a blast. And I know we've talked a lot about this. I think we should do a full review on this. Not that you haven't already heard a ton here, but I just want to play the game again. So if we can pull this off on Tabletop Simulator, I think it'd be worth it. Cool. So let's jump into just 3 more quick games here. I know it's getting late. Okay, next we played, this was my choice, I think, was Lost Ruins of Arnak. And we got to play with the Expedition Leaders expansion, which I've played a couple times 2-player, but I thought that Chris and Steve would really like it. And boy, did I have fun playing this game of Lost Ruins of Arnak. It makes the game so much heavier to me, though. Chris, how did you feel about it? Because I felt like there were so many more choices to make every turn for what is normally a fairly streamlined game.
I agree. I thought it did as well. It also took a couple of other things in the game, like the research track. You had opportunities for scoring that were in addition to the research track. The conventional wisdom in this game is you just speed up that research track, and that's all you're trying to do. And that wasn't necessarily the case here. I also like the asymmetric starting powers.
Yeah.
That was kind of interesting. You had one where you got to have a lot of snacks. I still don't quite get that whole thing. I had an extra worker. Steve had a bird that did some stuff, and I guess didn't eat any of your snacks, but he had a bird that was out there doing things. I didn't entirely understand what you guys were doing, but it sure looked interesting, and I was having fun doing what I was doing.
Yeah, my character, basically, I only start with 1 worker, but I have these snack tokens that I can place in the place that I was and move my worker to another space. So theoretically, I could have up to 4 workers in a turn. But some of the snacks I could place actually cost me extra resources, so I rarely got a chance to use them all. And you only unlock one of them by the 3rd turn in the game. So I basically could have used 3 workers like Chris did for free, but it cost me extra resources every time, so it made it a little harder to use. I think what really adds to the cognitive load here, though, is the fact that your starting deck is now different. And originally your starting deck is 2 money cards, 2 compass cards, and then you put 2 fair cards in there. And now each of the 4 starting cards, or at least on most of the decks, are completely unique. And usually they might give you an option of a compass or some other benefit if you meet a condition. And so all of a sudden now, instead of going through the first couple of rounds of just saying like, okay, well, I'll just dump these 2 compasses and, take this action. Now it's like, well, wait a second, I have 8 more choices to make just looking at my starting hand of cards. So it's fun that it adds the decisions. This is a case where I think it does slow the game down a little bit, but it's worth it in my opinion. I really like exploring. It definitely took a game that, again, was getting a little bit stale after 20 or so plays and feeling a little bit repetitive. And it's not repetitive at all anymore, depending on your asymmetric power and the track you're going up and, the monsters that are out there. It feels like you're going to have a lot of different paths to victory with this now.
I don't know if I have anything to say about Lost Ruins Arnak. I don't know. It's beautiful. I like it. I like the art.
Okay. All right. So that was designed by Min and Elwin, and that's CGE. Steve took the win on that one. So again, if you've been keeping score, we're in pretty rough shape here because we had 2 more games to go for the weekend. The next game was a game called Azul Queen's Garden. This is designed by Michael Kiesling and Next Move Games.
So now, Tim, I read something on Twitter. It seemed like you had some very, very strong feelings about Azul Queen's Garden here. Now, I don't want to spoil it, but what made Queen's Garden smell like manure?
Yeah, I probably put out the strongest negative language I've ever had about a game after playing Azul Queen's Garden on Twitter. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I might have exaggerated a little bit in that statement, but that's how I was feeling at the time. I had a very, very frustrating and miserable experience playing Azul Queen's Garden, but I want to hear what Chris has to think of it. Chris, do you remember playing Azul Queen's Garden?
No.
Yeah. I think, I was expecting with this game, I was expecting this to be one of the quicker, lighter games that we were going to play for the weekend. In fact, that's why we picked it, because we had just done a day of heavy games, and, it was fairly late, and it was probably 10 o'clock at night, and Steve's like, okay, I'll just teach you guys Azul Queen's Garden. I was like, great, fun little game. We've had a few drinks. Let's sit down and learn this. So let me tell you a little story. About a couple years ago, I was in Germany with some friends, and I went to stay with my friend's dad's house, and his dad's 80 years old. He's German, barely speaks any English at all. And we were playing a lot of card games at the time, a lot of Hearts, things like that, right? And so I like a light, fun, quick card game. And I like Azul, right? Because it's a light, fun, quick game, quick decisions. You play through quickly, you reset it up, you play it again or whatever. But we're in Germany, and his dad's friend is like, hey, I want to teach you guys, and this is all being translated to me, by the way, because he barely speaks English, but he's like, I want to teach you guys this game that I grew up playing. It's a game called Doppelkopf. We spent several hours playing this game, and I still never understood what scored, how I even played the game. It was just completely obfuscated to me. Like, I really couldn't wrap my head around this. And that is not what I want to do when I sit down to play with some playing cards, right? I like medium to heavyweight games, but that game it would have taken me weeks of playing to really grasp any kind of strategy or know how I could win at that game. That's how I felt playing Azul Queen's Garden. The general concept of it started to come together by the end of the game, but this was Azul, right? This is another version of Azul. So I was expecting a game that we're going to sit down, get a 5-minute rules teach on, start playing, see how it all scored together at the end. And I barely understood how to play this game by the end of the game. The scoring on it was completely insane to calculate. And it felt like a slog. Like, it felt like every turn you take so much effort to figure out which resources you need to collect to somehow place on your player board, because everything had to be connected but different colors and all of this stuff. And then I have to collect 6 of them and discard 5 just to keep 1 of them. And so it was like several turns to set myself up for this random turn. It was just a mess for what that game should have been in the Azul family. I shouldn't say that it's a bad game, because I pretty much said that on Twitter. I said, don't buy this game, because I think a lot of people who like Azul are going to buy this game and they're going to freaking hate it. And this is definitely not what I want when I'm playing a game of Azul's weight and length. It was not a fun experience for me at all.
I completely agree with everything that you just said. This game was so complex in terms of the scoring. Actually, the thing that was really complex was the tile placement.
Yeah.
I hated the tile placement in this because there were all these niggly little rules about what could go next to what. And Azul is pretty simple. That game it's elegant and simple. And this one, I felt like every turn I was trying to relearn what I could put next to the other tile and how that was going to score and what was it going to cost me. And it never became clear to me. I never really understood it. And for anybody who's thinking of this game as an Azul game, it is not Azul.
Yeah, let me clarify that I think I understood how to play the Great Wall and Nemesis, and the teach took about as long, but I understood those games easier than I understood this. And those are big, heavy Awakened Realms games. So yeah, this is not what I want in a abstract. Now, I will say that the production on this game was totally beautiful to me. I loved it. I loved the way the player boards looked, and the great little hexagon tiles are very, Azul type, beautiful little colorful tiles with little flowers printed on them. So the production was beautiful. The concept seemed interesting, but yeah, too heavy for what I want on this kind of game.
What did Steve have to say about this?
I think he hated us by the end of the game because we were complaining so much up through it. But now Steve had played it once before, and he taught it, but he struggled even, right? Like, he had played it before, and he had to kind of go back and reread some of the rules to us because he just, it's not an easy one. And then the whole time he's like, I'm sorry guys, but it's really hard to explain the scoring here. So this is how you play. Try to do the best you can in getting the biggest sets and most colors. And at the end, we'll go through the scoring because I can't even explain it to you until you see how it all goes together. I don't want to play a game that I can't even comprehend in the first play. I just wasted an hour doing an activity that didn't make any sense. So to set me up for hopefully next time I can play it. And again, there are heavy games that may be hard to grasp on a first play, but you still can find something to do with it, not just
Tim, you just described all of my first game experiences with board game. Sit around for 2 hours, not really know what I'm doing, and maybe fifth game I'll figure it out. This game sounds amazing to me.
I felt pretty bad for Steve by the end of this because I think he was feeling pretty bad. By this time, I think it was about 2 o'clock in the morning.
It took us several hours to get through this game of Azul Queen's Garden. Sorry, Steve. And I don't really know how he actually felt about it because he was so frustrated with us by the end of it. I think that he didn't really give us his feelings. So I'd be interested to hear when Steve listens to this. Steve, you've had a little time to reflect. How did you feel about this game? One other thing, I'll compare it to we've talked about the original Azul, but I played Azul Summer Pavilion, which is kind of headed in this direction. I remember playing it and feel like this is a little bit more obscure. Takes a little more time to build up kind of your sets to build this thing, but it had some cool things going on. But I felt like it was headed in the wrong direction from the original Azul. And I think the original Azul, what really struck me with that game was that there were some fun decisions, some cutthroat things to do, but it was quick and you just got through it and you could play again quickly. And Summer Pavilion kind of headed in the wrong direction, away from that. This one I think took it a step too far. So that's my opinion on it. I'd love to hear from our listeners if any of you were big Azul fans and then you try this game. Did it register a little bit better with you than it did with us? But not something I would care to go back to. Cool. So that was the last game of the night. Good thing. And we had time for one more game when we got up the next morning before I had to catch my flight back home to Phoenix. And my pick was Blood Rage by Eric Lang and Simon Games. This is a classic with us. We've played it dozens of times. We did our full review on it probably almost a year and a half ago now. Yeah, it's always been a big hit for us. One thing I'll say going into this game, though, and the reason I picked it is that it's been going up and up for me over the last year. Every time we play it, I like it more and more. So even though I always enjoyed it, you know how I was about area control games and heavy conflict games. I was always like, yeah, I liked it, but I wouldn't ask for it. Too many bad feelings. But something about this game, maybe it's just the familiarity of it over time or just my own changing perceptions on, whether I care whether I win or lose, but just the fact that I always have fun playing it. Getting all those big, huge minis out of the box and playing with all Chris's upgraded components. And, it was such a fun experience. I had such a blast playing this. So, Chris, what do you think of going back to Blood Rage?
I thought it was great. This is another one of those games that I'll play every day, any day, and have a great time with it. Favorite combat mechanism of all time, probably. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why there's fewer hard feelings there, is because the combat truly is a cat and mouse game. There's no dice rolling. There's no big, victory that comes out of nowhere because of something that was out of your control, throwing down cards and anticipating what your opponent's going to do, and you're either going to, you're going to succeed or you're not going to succeed, but it's entirely based on your own actions and your own planning. And to me, that makes it feel a little bit, I don't know, maybe that shouldn't make it feel more friendly, but it does to me.
One big moment that stood out in this game is that in the second round, we had 2 huge combats with like 12 characters in them, and both of the combats ended up ties, and so all of our characters went to Valhalla. And so by the end of the second round, there was like 1 character left on the board, and none of us had gotten any points. So we went into the third round with like low 20s points. Like, it was one of the lowest scoring games I've ever seen. So that was hilarious, and it set me up for a victory here because I went my classic Sea Serpent Fire Dragons route, because nobody else ever picks those cards, and I drafted them, managed to sacrifice both my boats in the final round, and they were sitting there ready to go up at the end of Ragnarok, and ended up picking up 60 something points at that point. So,
and Tim does this every single game. I'm not sure why
your boats, Tim. I know. Come on,
I'm not sure why we haven't figured this one out and stopped him yet, but he does it every damn time.
Yeah. Kurt, now we did get to play with the kind of the bonus Kickstarter minis, like the monster cards that were in the original Kickstarter, and they made the new sculpts in this one. And so it's fun to mix up some of those minis that we don't get to play with too often, because they're not on Board Game Arena or Tabletop Simulator or whatever. So it's fun to have some of the variety in there and have some different combat ability. I got the Wolfman, which everybody loves to hate on, but that was a blast. Chris, you had that one. He had this one monster that it's value is double the number of characters you have in Valhalla, and so he plays it for 3 or 4 power at the beginning of the third round, and it's 0 points, worth nothing, so he can't do anything in a combat, but he starts losing combats, and by the end of the game it's worth 12. It's like a 12 power monster walking around on the board. So that was cool. Pretty rad to see.
Didn't work out for me though. Lost big on this one.
So that was the last game of the whole weekend, unfortunately, but had a blast with every single one of them. I won that last one, but it wasn't enough to bring me into victory. I think we ended up with Steve having 7 points. I had 4 and Chris had 3 at the end of the weekend. So we were pretty neck and neck right up until the end of that second to last day. Yeah, and had so many fun gaming experiences. A lot of fun things to revisit, games that I already knew and loved, but a couple new big surprises, Nemesis specifically. But yeah, let me ask you, Chris, so what would you say was your favorite game that came out of this weekend? If there's one game, the rest of them had to be wiped off the planet, and you got to keep one of them, what's the one game you would keep?
I can't answer that. I can't answer what my favorite game of the weekend was, but I don't know that it's the one I'd want to take to the desert island with me, or get wiped off the face of the earth or whatever. My favorite game of the weekend was probably Wonderland's War. That game is so amazing and so much fun. Of all the games we played, it might not have been the best experience, which I'll come back to in a minute, but it had the best combination of production and fun game and mechanisms and a real gaming opportunity. Like Nemesis was almost more like a cinematic opportunity, but I think that was my favorite experience of the weekend. I think Nemesis was the highlight there. But it's not the kind of thing that I'd say, hey, I'm in a hardcore gaming mood right now. I want to beat up on somebody. That's the game I want to play. Wonderland's War, I think, is the way to go there.
What about biggest surprise, Chris? Anything that really surprised you for the weekend that you weren't expecting?
Even though it wasn't a superlative in any way, I think I was most surprised by Viscounts of the West Kingdom, because I went into it with zero expectation. I kind of expected to hate it, and I had a pretty fun time with it. The other games, I at least felt like I knew what I should expect. The only other thing I would consider to be a surprise was probably Great Wall. I wanted to like that one more, and I thought I was going to like that one more than I ended up liking it. And again, like with Viscounts, it wasn't where I loved that game, and it wasn't where I hated Great Wall. It just didn't quite live up to my expectations, and that made me a little sad. So what about you, Tim?
Yeah, so I unfortunately not going to have anything too exciting to share here, because I pretty much hit with you. Wonderland's War, the best game that I played this weekend. I think probably now in my top 10 games of all time at this point. So absolutely love that second experience with it. I'm going to be picking this game up hopefully in the next week or two. So yeah, awesome game, super fun. Best experience was Nemesis for sure. I mean, we just had so many exciting moments in that, just so much fun exploration in it. So again, saying just like you, probably wouldn't go back to it every week or anything like that, but boy, was that a fun one to jump through and dig into. And one I'd love to, I want to go back to. I want to play it some more, which again, kind of surprised me. As far as biggest surprise, I'm just going to give that to Nemesis as well, because, you know, not only was it a great experience, but I really didn't have super high expectations for how I was going to feel about it. And then biggest disappointment for me was definitely Azul Queen's Garden, because I don't know, for some reason I looked at it, it sounded like it was going to be really fun to me, and I thought it might be my favorite Azul. Boy, was I wrong on that one. Just that didn't really even feel like Azul at all. Was not the type of abstract game I want to play. Yeah, so that's it. Adam, anything aside from, you know, we talked about Nemesis a lot and you seemed interested, anything else that sounded particularly exciting to you that you want to dig into?
It's just great to hear Wonderland's War return with great fanfare. That sounds like a fantastic game, again, that I was excited about, and hearing you guys just kind of confirmed my wants to get that one in my collection as well. And then, yeah, I'll iterate the surprise, Tim, that you had with Nemesis, of your enjoyment with that. That sounds like a blast, just the way that, you know, the design comes from the way the choices you make are going to interact and not how the cubes are going to turn into other cubes. I just think that's a fantastic, different way for a gaming experience to happen, and it sounds like a joy.
Yeah, well, hey, one thing about Wonderland's War is that one of your concerns when we played it the first night was that it went a little long. I don't feel like it went long at all here. I think we whipped right through the rounds. So I think, you know, a lot of that was just tabletop simulator, first time play. But playing it in person, I felt like we probably knocked it out in less than 90 minutes, maybe an hour even after we had it all set up. It went pretty brisk.
Oh, man, that's great to hear.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Although I think it took longer to set up than it did to actually play it.
It did, yeah. Well, like you said, we did have a lot of punch board to deal with there. But yeah, the setup was heavy. So if you got it set up in advance, it goes quick. Cool. Well, all right. I think that will wrap up this conversation. The longest episode to date. So I hope you guys all enjoyed it. All right. Well, I think that will wrap us up. If you enjoyed the show, please rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the podcast. We'd love for you to follow us on Twitter at BG_hot takes and come out and chat with us and interact with us and answer polls out there. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.